Welcome to the Listening Time Podcast. Hey everybody, this is Connor, and you're listening to episode 182 of the Listening Time Podcast. I hope you're all doing great. I hope that you feel like your English has improved with all of this listening practice that you've done with these episodes. And today, we're going to talk about English. Specifically, we're going to talk about the topic of which countries speak English the best. Obviously, I'm referring to speaking English as a foreign language. Which countries have a high English level, even though English isn't the first language of the country. Okay, so obviously, I'm not including countries like Australia and Ireland and the UK and the US, etc. Okay, so I think this is an interesting topic to look at the level of English around the world and maybe think about why certain countries have a higher level of English than other countries. And I just want to say that even though I'm kind of ranking the countries here, I don't want you to get the wrong idea about this. Your English level is not an indicator of your worth, okay? So just because someone has a higher English level than another person, that doesn't mean that they're a better person, okay? So I'm just talking about this topic because it's interesting. I don't want to make it sound like certain countries are better than others in a general sense. Of course not, okay? This is just an interesting topic to discuss. So we're going to talk about that today. And of course, as always, I want to encourage you to become a Listening Time family member so you can use my advanced episodes to practice with English spoken fast. Okay? That will take you to the next step in your listening and in your English. So the link to sign up is down below. And I also encourage you to use my US Conversations podcast so you can start listening to conversations that two people have while speaking at normal speed. And of course, I provide the transcript for you and the definitions of key words and phrases that we use to help you understand everything. That's really good practice to help you reach the level where you can actually understand other people when they're talking and not just understand one person when they're talking to you, for example. So the link to sign up to that is also down below. And as always, please give this podcast a 5-star rating and write a review if you can. All right, let's get started. Are your ears ready? You know what time it is. It's listening time. Okay, I'm going to give the list of the top 10 countries around the world in terms of their English level. And of course, like I mentioned, I'm talking about countries that don't speak English as their first language. Okay, so I got this information from a website. I think it's the EFEPI, which stands for English Proficiency Index. This is some type of index where they have the different countries ranked in terms of their English level. So that's where I got this information. And this will probably be different from other charts that you might see online. So you'll probably be able to find other rankings on other websites that are different, but I'm going to use this one. it seems pretty official. Okay? All right. So the number one country is obvious for me. I don't know if it's obvious for you, but it was no surprise to me. The number one country is the Netherlands. So people in the Netherlands speak English very well. And I'm not saying that everyone does, but in general, this country speaks English well. If you go there as a tourist and you speak English, I'm sure that you'll be able to communicate very well in the Netherlands. So there are a couple reasons why this was obvious for me. I think number one, Dutch, the language in the Netherlands, the main language, is one of the closest languages to English. Okay, I think that it's probably one of the top 3 or top 5 closest languages to English. I think that there are a couple that are even closer. I think Afrikaans, a language spoken in the the southern part of Africa, I think that is even closer. I think there's a certain minor dialect of a certain language that might also be closer to English. There are a couple that are closer, probably, but Dutch is very closely related to English. However, funny enough, I, for example, can't understand Dutch. If someone speaks Dutch to me, there will probably be a few words here and there that I can understand, but it's completely incomprehensible to me. So it's not like when you speak Portuguese as your native language and you hear someone speak Spanish, and even though you don't speak Spanish, you can understand a lot of what they're saying. No, it's not like that with English and the other Germanic languages that English is related to. So it's not that easy to understand the other languages in the same family with English. But Dutch is a closely related language. So it makes sense that people in the Netherlands can speak English well. And also just because the countries in, let's say, the northern part of Europe, it's a common thing for these countries to speak English well. So you'll see some of these other countries on the list. I won't get ahead of myself here. When you get ahead of yourself, this means that you start talking about something before it's time to talk about it yet. So like you're already talking about the next thing, but you're not ready to talk about it yet. Okay. So I'm not going to get ahead of myself here, but you'll see other countries from the north of Europe on this list. So because of those two things, I was not surprised to see that the Netherlands is number one. And I have never had a student from the Netherlands in all of my years teaching English. Not many people there would need to take classes with someone like me because a lot of them speak English well. All right, number 2, the second country on this list is Singapore. So for some of you who don't know anything about Singapore, this might be surprising. It sounds kind of random that this country is number 2, but there's a very good reason why it's number 2, and that is that English is a lingua franca there. A lingua franca is a common language that is used among speakers of different languages so that they can communicate with each other, right? So, for example, many years ago, French was the lingua franca all around Europe. So people from different countries might speak French to each other in order to communicate with each other if they didn't speak the same native language. Okay, so in Singapore, English is the lingua franca. People use it to communicate with each other because there might be people from different language backgrounds there, so they need a language to use in order to talk to each other, and English is that language. So for that reason, it's not a huge surprise that Singapore is number 2, because people use it as their second language or third language to talk to other people that don't speak their language. Okay? All right, number 3. Number 3 was a little bit surprising to me, but when I thought more about it, it wasn't as surprising anymore, and that is Austria. So I was a little surprised because I just assumed that almost all of the top 6 or 7 countries would be countries from the northern part of Europe. And Austria isn't that far north. So that's why I was a little surprised. But when I thought more about it, I wasn't quite as surprised, because when I thought back to my years of teaching, I realized that I think I've only had like one student, or maybe not even a single student from Austria out of all of the many thousands of hours of teaching I've done. I might have had one student from Austria, maybe. So when that's the case, that tells me that that country is good at speaking English. When it comes to like European countries, of course, there are many countries in other parts of the world where people don't really have the ability to take online English classes. So that's different. But in Europe, online English classes are pretty accessible. So if I've never had a student from a country, that's a good indicator that that country is probably decent in terms of their English level. So Austria is number 3. A little surprising, but I guess not too surprising for me. Number 4. This one is not surprising. This one is Denmark. Okay. Denmark is one of those northern European countries that I'm talking about. And that's why I'm not at all surprised. I've never had a student from Denmark, and I would say that most online English teachers would probably say the same thing because a lot of people in Denmark speak English really well. If you travel there and you only speak English, you'll be fine. Danish is also a language that is somewhat similar to English, not as similar as Dutch, but it is somewhat similar, so that also helps a lot. And in general, I already mentioned that Northern Europe has the tendency to speak English well, and that's also because these countries don't have really big populations, and people from other countries don't usually speak the languages of these countries. So in order to be more connected to the outside world and to consume entertaining content like movies and TV and stuff like that, the people in these countries use English in order to connect to the world outside their country. So that's a tendency in Northern Europe, and Denmark is part of that region. So that's number 4. Number 5, no surprise, is Norway. This is another one of those Northern European countries. I've never had a student from Norway. I've, of course, had students that live in these countries, that live in the Netherlands, in Denmark, in Norway, etc. But these are students from other countries that have moved to these countries. But I've never had a student from Norway, so it's pretty much the same story as Denmark, and Norwegian is in the same family, the same language family, so it's also similar to English, and so all of that is why Norway is number 5. Number 6, again, no surprise, Sweden. Another Northern European country, same story. I've never had a student from here. It's a similar language to English. It's in that same general family of those Northern European languages, right? So no surprise there. Sweden, number 6. Number 7, this one is a little bit surprising to me. But again, when I thought more about it, it wasn't that surprising because I've actually never had a student from this country, which is a little strange, and that is Belgium. So Belgium is number 7 on this list. So apparently this country has a high level of English, and in this country, people speak either Dutch or French, and they might use a different name for their variety of Dutch. But I guess it's not a surprise that the Dutch-speaking portion of the population speaks English well, because the Netherlands is number 1 on this list, and they speak Dutch. So I guess that's not a big surprise. However, there are many French speakers in Belgium, and so I'm not sure what the level of just the French-speaking portion of the population is. That would be interesting to see, but I don't have those numbers in front of me. But I was a little surprised at this, but again, I keep going back to my experience as a teacher, and the fact that I've never had a student from Belgium tells me that this is a country that speaks English pretty well. Number 8, this might be a little surprising to some of you. It's not as surprising to me, actually, and that is Portugal. I say that it's not as surprising to me because I've been to Portugal before, and I saw that, yeah, they speak English pretty well. I tried to speak Portuguese as much as possible when I was in Portugal, and sometimes the people there just weren't interested in talking to me in Portuguese, unfortunately. It wasn't my favorite linguistic experience that I had in Europe, because I came prepared thinking that I would speak a bunch of Portuguese, but I ran into many situations in which I would say something in Portuguese and then the person responded in English. And I've said this before. Many of you probably disagree with me about this, but I really like when I travel to a country and I can actually practice the language in that country and the people don't just immediately respond in English. I am not a big fan of those situations because I'm a language learner. I don't want the person to just immediately talk to me in English. So it wasn't my favorite linguistic experience, but I loved Portugal. It's a beautiful country. But yeah, people in Portugal speak English pretty well. Not everyone, of course, but I'm not surprised that Portugal is pretty high on this list. Number 9 is South Africa. So this is a tricky one because some people think of South Africa as being an English-speaking country, and yeah, it kind of is. And I think that it's on this list because there are many other languages that are spoken there, and English is more the lingua franca there, rather than just the native language that everyone speaks when they're born. So I didn't know if South Africa would be included on this list, but they included it. I don't know too much about the linguistic culture of South Africa, so I can't say how many people grow up speaking English as their native language. So I don't know that, but I do know that English is a lingua franca there. And so, of course, South Africa is a country where you can speak English and tons of people understand you perfectly. And many people there speak it as a native language as well, I assume. Again, I don't know all the details, but that's what I'm assuming. And number 10 on this list. Number 10 is Germany. So nowadays we think of Germany as a pretty good English-speaking country. I think that people that have spent a lot of time in Germany and have gone to the different regions of Germany, including the north and the south, east and west, I'm sure people that have traveled all around Germany have run into plenty of German people that aren't really comfortable speaking English. It's definitely not at the level of those Northern European countries that I mentioned before, like Denmark and Norway and Sweden, and of course the Netherlands, right? But we tend to think of Germany nowadays as a pretty good country when it comes to speaking English. But I have had German students before, so this tells me a lot. I haven't had students from those other countries, but I have had students from Germany. So I would assume that Germany is lower than those other countries, but it's still a very good English-speaking country, so it's number 10 on this list. So as you can see, most of the countries that we talked about on this list in the top 10 are European countries. And if you look at the top 25, it's mostly European countries. However, there are some notable exceptions in terms of European countries that aren't near the top of this list. Countries like Spain and Italy and France. And why is that? Why aren't these countries at the top of the list? I think there are several reasons for this. I think one of the biggest reasons is that the languages in these three countries have a lot of power in terms of their history. Like if you just look back at the history of these languages and how many people have spoken them, how powerful they've been. For example, French used to be like the lingua franca of the world in the past. And There are many speakers of these languages nowadays, more so Spanish and French, more than Italian. But still, if you compare like how many Spanish speakers there are in the world to how many Danish speakers there are, you can't even compare them, right? Or if you compare how many French speakers there are to the number of Norwegian speakers, again, you can't even compare them. There are so many more French speakers around the world. So they have more native speakers. Like Spanish has more native speakers than English even, okay? So there are many speakers. There's a lot of power, historically speaking, in these languages. Even like Italian, for example, there aren't a huge number of Italian speakers, but Italian just has like a very set place in our minds as being like a beautiful language that is related to art and culture and food and things like this. It's related to these other things, and so people want to learn it for different reasons. And so those are all reasons why. And I think that there's a lot of content in these languages. So if you're a Spanish speaker, you can live your whole life and just consume Spanish content on social media and YouTube and movies and TV and podcasts. There are all kinds of interesting things to consume in Spanish and in French and in Italian, I think. So there's a lot of content in these languages. So people in those countries don't necessarily have to learn English in order to find interesting content for entertainment or to learn things or whatever. So that's another reason. And I think that people in these countries are a little bit more, let's say, proud of their language. They might really love their language and the culture around their language, its history. So for that reason too, they might be less inclined to want to speak English, right? So I think that's why those countries aren't in the top 25, for example, right? And one last thing, I wanted to mention the top non-European country on this list where English has absolutely no official status. Because, like I mentioned, in Singapore and in South Africa, these countries were on the list, but English is a lingua franca there. It's an official language in those countries, I think. What is the top country that is not in Europe and in which English has no official status? I was really surprised by this. That is Argentina. Argentina is number 28. I have a lot of listeners from Argentina, and I've had plenty of students from Argentina. So this is a little surprising to me, but maybe to some of you or people that live in Argentina, this might not be as surprising, but I was surprised by Argentina being number 28 on this list. Pretty cool. All right, I hope this episode was interesting for you. Again, I'm not trying to say that some countries are better than others because of their English level. No, I just wanted to talk about this topic. It's pretty interesting. And as always, remember that you have my advanced podcast episodes that you can use to practice with real English spoken fast. Okay? The link to sign up for those is down below. And you also have my US Conversations podcast that you can use to listen to two people talking at normal speed. So the link to sign up for that is also down below. All right. Thank you so much for listening to this episode, and I'll talk to you on the next episode of Listening Time.